All right. Okay, I think we're good to go. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you this morning. It's great to connect with everybody. A lot has happened since our last meeting about a month ago. So we do have a few things that we'd like to discuss, but I really wanted to make lots of time to hear from the group this morning, just on updates and intel about where we're at and where we're going. So I think we'll jump in. Hopefully everyone got a revised agenda that we sent out. We just had a few last minute updates and changes. So I'm gonna follow that. And so I think that the big news, of course, is we're moving into stage 3 tomorrow. So I'm really interested to hear. I know that that's going to affect some of you more than others, but I'm certainly interested just to hear feedback about where things are at and to identify challenges and issues and concerns and questions. We have Dr. Hugh from Public Health on the call today. Kieran is taking some much needed holidays, but Hugh has been, if I can say this, Hugh, I think you're like Kieran's right-hand man on a lot of the work around the guidelines and restrictions and the details with masking and face coverings and all of that stuff. So thank you for joining us, and we might put you on the hot seat and ask a few questions of you as well. That would be great. So maybe we'll start off maybe with some high-level feedback from Ian. Ian, if you want to, if you can kind of kick things off by just giving us a bit of a survey about what you're hearing, and then maybe I'll go to the group from there.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. So lately we've been doing a lot of what I call mask-to-mask meetings these days. Businesses are all hands on deck right now, employing safety measures to continue to serve customers and ramp up services as we look for additional reopening measures starting tomorrow. We've seen several businesses reaching out that fall sort of in the gray areas that aren't clearly defined through the regulations distributed through public health. So on that note, I want to commend public health. Really, we've been actively working with public health management, enforcement, and infection control teams so that we're able to get direction of businesses rapidly. So we're encouraging businesses to reach out to us if you have questions and you just want some clarity on how you can reopen. It's something that we've been working really well with public health on, just to try and limit the amount of inbound calls that public health is getting right now. So we're sort of considering ourselves another conduit for that communication. But it's been great. Also on that note, with the announcement earlier this week of moving to stage 3, public health had updated their regulations and guidelines on their website for stage 3 within about an hour of that announcement, which is amazing. So I don't know if it's something to be proud of or not, but I think how fast we've been able to work through this ever-changing pandemic is we've seen efficiencies created for businesses. A couple of main points that I just wanted to bring up quickly that I'm seeing from businesses is we're starting to see a potential supply chain issue that might be on the horizon. Obviously, with a lot of people looking at staycations and staying around the KFL&A area, a lot of stock for our local businesses are being depleted. And with delays in logistics and shipping, a lot of businesses are seeing their stock is almost gone, and they might be 4 to 6 weeks out from receiving new stock. If they're carrying products from distributors in California or the States or across the ocean, there could be potential supply chain issues with that. So that's one thing that we're seeing. The other thing is still we're seeing a bit of an issue getting staff back to work due to the ongoing battles with reduced hours and the need for shift flexibility. Many workers would rather stay at home and collect CERB than get back into the trenches, so to speak. So just trying to work through some of that and find out if we can find a happy median on how we can get workers back in the businesses. I guess the silver lining in all of this right now is because of our geographical location, we're seeing a large influx in interest in Kingston from businesses looking to expand in the region. Which is pretty cool to see right now. So we're talking to several large corporations that are looking at making Kingston a home. So, I mean, in all of this, it might be some great job creation in the next 12 to 18 months if we can lock some of these opportunities down. And then just the last thing that I wanted to say, we've seen a shift from the fear of the pandemic through business. And there was some time of anger, and we're seeing a bit of anxiety right now. So our communications throughout all the business support teams is just trying to relay the message of being patient with people. There's lots of hands on deck trying to find the right solutions for things. There's municipalities going through this across the country. And I think now is a great time for a group like this to think outside the box and really come up with some creative ways that we can put that Kingston stamp on our programming and our solutions to supporting economic rebound for Kingston. So that's what I've been seeing the last couple of weeks, and we're continuing to work with the businesses to get answers for them. And like I said earlier, public health has been just awesome the last couple of weeks with communication with us. So that's it for me.
That's great. Are there any questions for you? Yeah, Pavna.
Thanks, Ian. And yes, kudos to public health. Even for our agencies, you've been amazing at giving us advice and giving us help. Ian, I had a quick question. This is the focus of your survey or your input mostly like retail and tourism, or is it like the manufacturing, finance? Are those part of your discussion?
Yeah, well, I try to cast as wide of a net as possible throughout my discussions on a daily and weekly basis. So I've been talking to a lot of lenders, commercial lenders in the community. They're seeing trending that is quite interesting with respect to how some of the businesses are performing and reevaluating how they offer their services, looking at their business models. So I'm looking at financials. I'm looking at manufacturing as well, trying to stay in touch with the manufacturing community, retail, small, medium, and large size, and just trying to get a pulse on everything that's happening around the Kingston area. And I live in sort of the Kingston rural community, so I'm trying to keep a pulse on the outlying areas as well, because we're seeing a lot of influx in business attraction and business activity in the outlying areas as well.
Great. Just because manufacturing, they wouldn't have the issue about less shifts or anything, because my understanding is most of them are actually functioning okay. They're running.
Yeah, I think the biggest threat that could loom in the manufacturing sector would be just a general slowdown of the economy globally. They've been able to, a lot of manufacturers have been able to restructure their shifts. Instead of doing maybe a 10-hour shift, they've split them up and shorten the amount of or reduce the amount of workers on a specific line and spread out the shifts. But up until now, supply chain for the most part has been good. It's just the general global slowdown that is probably going to backlog some of that revenue growth for probably the next 12 to 18 months. The nice thing about a lot of large scale manufacturing is their sales pipelines are full beyond 1, 2, and 3 years. So they've got lineups and queues of orders that stretch out to 2023. So as long as they have the raw materials to manufacture the products, they can continue to work on that. It's the logistics of getting the products out of our city that could end up slowing things down.
Thanks.
Dan, go ahead.
I thank you, Brian. It was really interesting, Ian, that you say that there's companies looking to relocate in Kingston. It seems like such a contradictory request, and that's just I guess that's one of the little bits of silver linings that we're hoping are going to come out of this whole experience.
Yeah, I think I'll put on the Ian hat as opposed to just the ECDEV hat here for a second, and I really feel like people are reevaluating how they do their business. And when you look at major centers, GTA, Montreal, National Capital Region, people might want a little bit more space and a little bit better quality of life as they're reevaluating their existence now. And I think, as we all know, Kingston is a great place to live, work, and play. So why not, as you're looking at expanding, why not make Kingston your home? We're close to the border. We're close to major centers. There's also, I'm working with somebody right now. It's very preliminary stages, but they're looking at taking advantage of some of the provincial grants and RFP programs to help stimulate more made in Canada and made in Ontario type programming. So, this will be a quick turnaround. If we can get this win for Kingston, I think it would be huge. So I'll probably be looking to many people on this call right now for added support to expedite getting them locked into Kingston.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Ian at this point? Thanks, Ian. That's yeah, really interesting. Some really good points to put on our radar, especially as we're going to have a discussion a little bit later on and starting to shift to our head to our facilitated session in a couple of weeks, starting to do some more of that strategic thinking about how we're going to position the city for those kind of opportunities. So that's great.
Could I,
yes.
just Ian, if there's anything that we can do in terms of the quality of life in Kingston and doing tours of the Isabel and various venues, because the quality of life in Kingston is so active, and that's part of a relocation decision. Anything that we can do to show how much is happening in Kingston, please let us know, and we're always happy to help.
Thanks, Tricia. I will definitely take you up on that offer as we do some site tours for Kingston.
Excellent. That is great. So with stage 3 on the horizon tomorrow, I'm interested to hear from everyone, just from your sector specific lens, about how things are going. And this is really a chance for put things on my radar, and staff. We've got our business support organizations on the call as well. So really looking for the good, the bad, and the ugly, or whatever that might look like. And if there are questions or uncertainty, be able to identify that as well. So I'd love to be able to hear from everybody. So I'm not sure who wants to jump in first. And Tricia, go ahead. I thought you might have a few things to say about stage 3. So.
It's great. Stage 3 is happening, but still with 50 people. That's a limitation. And like other businesses, the arts are based on the crowd model. And when you've got 50 people out of in the Grand Theatre, 100 or 800 seats or 500 seats at the Isabel, that does not pay the bills. And we are still, I hand it to the arts community. Everybody's doing so much right now, reaching out and doing really fabulous things, but it is not creating employment for artists. And so that crowd will need to be bigger before the concerts are more feasible. And so that's still a concern in terms of employment for artists. And even with wedding work and all of that, that actually disappeared this summer for people. So we're still very concerned about the viability of live performances when you've got 50 people in the audience.
I think that's a really good point. And that was one of the questions that I had for you, to say if you can open, but if the restrictions are such that it's just not viable financially, it doesn't do much. And so I'm just wondering, how far away are you from a threshold that you think would make a big difference? Are we still way away from that? Do you have any sense of what would need to happen in order to get you over that tipping point?
Well, I think it depends on the concert and the fees of the artist. So there are concerts that could happen at 50, but I think when we talk about some of the larger venues, you're still looking at that 50% of venue cost, depending on the cost of the artist and what's happening. So it's still a way away. But we still have artists, even with weddings, which tend to be more than 50 people who have lost a lot of work, and arts workers as well. So the employment issue is still, we've got to work at to make it actually practical to get everybody back to work. And it's arts workers and artists.
No, absolutely. That makes perfect sense, Tricia. Thank you. Who would like to jump in next? Sean.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Just a little backward-looking information that's maybe helpful. Our accommodation sector gets great data trailing. So just to give you an idea of where we're at, the month of May was down 80% in terms of hotel performance in the city. So that was substantial, 40 points of occupancy. So a month that we typically run in the low to mid 60s, we were 22%. Rate was down $53, so which is a very dangerous situation. It's a race to the bottom in some cases, and that's very difficult for us to recover from. So there's a real challenge there in terms of trying to hold rate up which leads to profitability. And it makes me think about something Tricia just said is, can we look at the model differently when, 800 people paying $20 or $30 or $50, would I pay more in the new social contract if there were only 50 people in the venue? Would I be willing to pay $200? To get out and experience arts. It's one of the things that I'm trying to conceptualize about my own business and talk to the accommodation community about, given all the things that we're trying to do to keep people safe. So year to date, that we were actually a little bit ahead going into COVID. The indicators for January, February, and through to mid-March had us up. Rate was up a little bit, occupancy was holding, so you can really feel the impact over kind of that 10-week period of what it's done to knock us down. Reservations bookings are coming in my own case, and I'm hearing from others, but they're not coming in anywhere near the volume that we would have hoped for. There's still, and it's something we'll talk about later, I think there's still a big issue with consumer confidence. And as successful, I think, as the messaging relative to local is, we just don't have enough individuals in our own marketplace to feed the accommodation sector effectively. So we are seeing some take up on staycations and those kinds of things, and I got to tell you, we really appreciate it. But there's just not enough volume in our region to generate support for the hotels. So there's a lot of hoteliers who are struggling and having a very, very difficult time. And obviously everyone understands the spin-off of what that's doing to employment and what that's doing to local suppliers, because the vast majority of our accommodation partners are buying local, whether that be food, supplies, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still having a rough go, and it's reinforcing our belief that until larger groups can gather in the arts, until we have an opportunity to continue to grow out of phase 3 and beyond, that our road to hoe is a long one.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Sean. Tim, I'd like to maybe hear from you. I know that restaurants were certainly a part of stage 3 as well. I'd like to just get your thoughts and perspective on how your industry is looking at things, what you're anticipating, how things have been going.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's similar to Sean's statistics for hospitality. Most of the restaurant industry has been down about 80% last month, which is obviously very significant. Over half of hospitality workers were with it. So, while there has been some improvements, we see a long road ahead of us. In terms of reopening, stage 3 seemed to be a little bit, even though we got still the 4 days notice, it was a lot smoother in terms of availability of information from public health. Particularly, what was great was that even in stage 2, public health had issued guidelines for opening the inside of your restaurant even before. So they were ahead of the game, which was not what was happening prior to that. So we had a lot to go with. So we did a lot of preparations. It's not quite the scramble for us anyway that stage 2 was. I do know that some restaurants are not planning on opening inside yet. They just don't feel that they're ready, and that's a business choice that people will make. They may be just doing a little bit of a wait and see how things go. Again, and to Tricia's point, the difficulty with the 50 people, and I'm sure there's underlying reasons for this in terms of controlling the virus, but you'd think it'd be capacity. If the whole goal is social distancing and you have a 10,000 square foot space versus a 1,500 square foot space, 50 people in those two buildings are very different things. But obviously there would be reasons for this. I know that a lot of other provinces have based on, for restaurants at least, on capacity rather than a number of people. For a lot of the restaurants downtown were fairly small, but there are some larger locations obviously that are going to be more challenged to try to open with that capacity. And I'm thinking of the bigger clubs and places like that. But once you measure it all out and keep everyone distance, it's a really pretty limited number of seats that you're able to accommodate. But you know what, to be honest, I think that makes our staff comfortable. It's sort of dipping our feet in the pool and getting ready, and hopefully it'll make customers feel safe as well. KFLA, I had a few questions and I didn't funnel them through Kedco Ian, but they were answered very quickly, and so this has been a overall good experience for us, at least to get back open. That's it for me.
Tim, that's great. If I could just ask just one follow-up question. So do you think that your sector would be unified in preferring a percentage capacity, or do you think that the smaller establishments actually prefer the 50 number versus going to a percentage? Do you see a division there, or do you think that there would be a unified?
Yeah, no, that there would definitely not. It would be hard to get consensus on that. But even with with social distancing, it's between patrons, so it's not 6 feet between tables. So picture 6 feet between each chair, and that's significant. So even if you have a small space, it'd be hard to get to that 50 anyway. But you're right. I mean, it would be different for each location, I think.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Tim. Super. Abba, how are things going for you in your sector?
Morning, everyone. I think if we were to look at the pattern beginning of the year again, we were doing well. I think all spas were doing well. And then even when we were able to open in stage 2, we were limited. We were only able maybe to do 40% because as an aesthetic business, we were not able to do any face services. And at this time of the year, this is when we do many facials, eyelash extensions, brow tinting, waxing. This is kind of the prime season. And so for us, that was kind of a hard pill to swallow, but again, good, because I think my staff also, similar to what Tim said, echoed feeling better, being able to ease into the transition of coming back into work after being off. And I would say even with that, we were doing well. We were kind of climbing, and then we had the incident in Kingston, which then dropped everything. And so I think most places that did aesthetics either had their staff off for 2 weeks. We held on to our staff and we tried to make use of like the wage subsidy and things like that to keep them busy. But it went down, I would say 80 to 90%. There were some days where we had very minimal bookings, which was unheard of at this time of year. And so we really took a hard hit over the last 3 weeks. We could kind of see customer confidence kind of building back up slowly. And so at least there's kind of an upward movement, but still very cautious now how we start to bring people back on, because we could see how volatile things go, especially in our particular arena of beauty. When there's a change in kind of anything. And so just being cautious with that and trying to be, like we are not hitting our numbers either to make it. And this is kind of a prime season. I know maybe similar to restaurants, like this summer is the season where you make a bulk amount of your money, especially in Kingston. Once winter comes, forget it, right? And so I'm not sure where we're at, and especially in September where we would normally get another burst from students. That also maybe minimized. I think it's good and that I'm hearing that many students are keeping their rentals, and so that they may be coming back. So maybe we wouldn't have such a dramatic loss, and there may be some kind of impetus and some motivation for them to come in and do these services. But overall, for us, I think it's going to take a very long time to kind of recoup. And I think there will be a lot of people who would have to make very tough decisions if it continues in this manner, because it is definitely not a sustainable one. And then I echo the sentiments of everyone else that we really have to build back consumer confidence, particularly in the personal service industry where we were hard hit. We were all put and painted under the same brush. And so everyone, as Ian also mentioned, there was kind of a trend. We went through, people were very angry and then shaming people, how dare you go for a massage or get your nails done, So then there was a lot of that. And so kind of building back a little bit more kindness. So I'm also very happy to see kind of the change in the tone of the marketing, because I think for a very long time, even into stage 2, the messaging that was being sent out was stay home, stay safe, do essential things. And I think now that we're kind of changing to be kind, wear a mask, you can do certain things, that is kind of changing the mindset of people so that they're not as judgmental of other people who may choose to do things different from how they may choose to do things. So I guess, yeah, for us, it's totally going to be a long road. It's going to be a cautious one, and we're going to have to be very cognizant of staff hiring and keeping those, and then keeping the customer confidence and building that up and seeing how we are able to sustain. I think if we can get through the next year, then, that's where we'll be.
Thanks, Ava. No, that's great. Yeah, Tim, go ahead. Tim, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I want to just echo a bit of what Abba was saying. Obviously, I've spoken quite a bit about the long road ahead and how we'll need government programs to continue to get through the winter, particularly the wage subsidy. But I also want to touch on what happened when we did have the outbreak. Yes, business just tanked, and not just downtown, across the city. And it has been starting to ramp up significantly. So we've been busy, like on Tuesday nights and Monday nights. This just all started over this past week, and every night's been really surprisingly busy this week. And all downtown, you see a lot more activity. So I guess what that leads me to is that I hope that business owners, and I know that we do, feel a big responsibility here to practice all the protocols, because we've seen what can happen when guidelines aren't followed, and how quickly that can affect the whole city. So we do have a lot of responsibility, and I just hope that everyone does their part, and I think they will be. But it's just so important that we follow the protocols to a T, and even further. But anyway, I just hope that we're all doing that, because it can have a huge effect when we have an outbreak.
That's a great point, Tim. Absolutely, it just takes one business to create a huge crush of confidence for everybody. I think that's a good message, that we all have to be in it together, for sure. Dave, I'm going to go to you next. I'm interested just to hear, what you're hearing, and from the employer perspective. Of course, we heard earlier about, they're still nervous, and so we talk about consumer confidence, but there's also the staff confidence about, heading back into the workplace. I'm just interested to know what you're hearing, and where things are at on the labor side.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Just what you said there. There is still quite a bit of apprehension with people going back into the workplace. There are many employers, a lot of employers across the city are definitely going above and beyond to protect their workers. They're really thinking outside the box on different unique ways that they can protect their workers, putting up barriers, things like that. And that's amazing to see. Like Tim said, a lot of them are taking on the responsibility of protecting workers. But there is some concerning employers across the city that are doing the bare minimum. And so I really hope that some of these places that aren't taking on that responsibility kind of take the next step. Some situations that there's customer employee transactions that are in very close quarters, but then at a cash, you'll see plexiglass. So in a lot of instances, it would be great to have plexiglass wherever there is close contact with, say, somebody making sandwiches and customer, and not just doing the bare minimum at a cash, for instance. There's a lot of concern about childcare issues, people going back to work and not having adequate childcare still. As Ian mentioned, with the CERB, I am hearing the same things, that a lot of precarious work, it's more beneficial for them just to stay on the CERB. Which this speaks to the importance of a living wage and increasing things like that. that's pretty much it. I'd just like to say that public health has done an amazing job of keeping the residents in Kingston safe, and the numbers of our outbreaks have really shown the great work that they have done. So thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. And I think your point about encouraging every business to do everything they can because of what an outbreak can do to confidence in business, kind of what Tim was saying. So that's great feedback. Susan, we'll go to you next. Interested not only how things are going at the CAT Center, just the retail sector, what you're hearing in general. I know when we had spoken times, you knew that it would take a number of weeks for confidence to rebuild, and of course then we had an outbreak. And so I'm just interested to know where things are at, what you're seeing from your lens.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think what's interesting listening to everybody talk is, and I'm sure we're all experiencing the same thing, is the passing of time. When we think about the outbreak, it feels like it was months ago, but it wasn't. It was only a few weeks ago, and it was really tough on everybody. We were running at a pretty good clip. We were building our business back, and then everything sort of came to a halt. And we all experienced the same thing. I think what's really important in that whole scenario is how quickly everything got under control. I think that speaks well of the community and the people that are responsible for that, and are obviously all of us. So I think that has been interesting to watch how quickly we got used to things being a little bit back to normal and how quickly they can go back. And that's what Abba was saying, is just keeping our guard up a little bit and being very aware of how real the situation is that we're in. With respect to the next phase of that was masks, and being in our business, having everybody come into the shopping center had to wear a mask was incredibly well received by the consumers. We only opened one door at the time so that we can control people coming in to make sure everybody was complying with the new order. I would say 95% of the people that walked through the door had a mask on already, and the other 5%, 4% of those people went back to their car and picked up their mask and came back in. And the 1%, we had some extra masks on hand just in case people forgot. It was new. And so, but on an ongoing basis, we are now open. All of our doors are open, and we have security patrolling, making sure that everybody's wearing a mask. And really, it is the exception, not the rule, of people not wearing a mask. So everybody's taking things very seriously, which on our side makes our job a little bit easier to keep our buildings safe, keep our consumers safe. But traffic in the shopping center, it isn't back yet. Well, we have about 90% of our retailers open. The remaining few, some will open with the new stage 3 coming into play, when that will trigger opening our food court. And that's a little bit tricky. Again, the interpretation of the gathering of 50, is it a gathering of a specific time? There's interpretation there that's a little bit gray, and we're just asking for some clarification on that, but I'm sure that will come. We're ready. We have the food court sectioned off in different areas. It'll be nice for people to be able to have some place to sit. It won't be a place to sit and relax for a while. It'll be a place to come sit, eat your food, and then leave. But we really have had no seating in the property since we began. So again, our retailers are clearing out merchandise right now, and that's not uncommon. Those of us in retail know that in July, that's a clearance time for product. It's usually in anticipation of bringing in the fall line. And I think that's where we'll see the delay, is just as everybody was saying, bringing product back into the property. So we'll see what that has. And that kind of rolls me into the next phase of our business, which is the SECRA application. They have extended that to July, which is, we're all breathing a little bit easier, because the issue isn't over, and trying to keep all of our retailers healthy and moving forward. The paperwork involved in that's been delightful. It's been an incredible task, but we seem to be almost through that process. Anyone smiling, I know, has been through it. So as far as Cataraqui is concerned and the retail, I think it's consumer confidence, it's kindness and patience. It's not the time for anyone to be to be upset with one another and to be cruel to one another. It's not productive. We're all a little bit anxious. We're all a little nervous, and we're also trying to build our businesses back up. With respect to our 2 nail salons, my heart goes out to those 2 women that run those businesses because they put their heart and soul into their business, and it's been tough. But again, they built a great business and it will come back. It's just going to take time. And again, as the landlord, we need to work with them to make sure that they can do that. So that's sort of where we're at Cataraqui.
Oh, that's great. Great feedback, Susan. What would you say from relative to a typical year, what is the traffic in the CAT Center like? Is it 50% of what it ordinarily would be? Is it, if you give us a ballpark, what would you say?
I would say we would have reached 50% before the outbreak. I think we're probably around 40% at this point. And sales are a reflection of that. Some stores are doing better than that, but most are doing about 40% of what they would normally do. And again, we've reduced our hours to try and accommodate for some of the expenses, but yeah, we're not there. We're not back yet, but it's growing.
That's great. Thanks very much, Susan. Dan, maybe I'll go to you next. How's the construction sector doing in general? How are things?
We've been so fortunate to be able to work in most areas right along. There were some projects that were kind of mothballed because of municipal restrictions, but for the most part, we've been able to work, and for that, we all continue to be thankful. It has been a struggle for us managing the masks and the social distancing and the sterilizing, if you like, of hand tools that are shared. That's been really difficult for excuse my bluntness, but the crusty old construction workers. That's been a challenge for us. And for the most part, we work in a fishbowl, and the public watches carefully. And if they see 3 or 4 of us gathered together, it's like, you guys aren't doing what you're supposed to do. So that's been a challenge. It is ironic, Susan's comment a minute ago about being how important it is to be kind and not a good time to be aggressive. The heat bothers our construction workers, especially any of the outside construction workers, and we can blame short fuses on the heat. But the reality is the whole landscape that we've been working with in these last several months has caused all of our fuses to get somewhat shorter. And it's a really good reminder that we would probably be so much better off if we could just help each other, remind each other to take a breath. That's really, really important. And to Tim's point about the environment, the landscape is actually surprisingly fragile. Susan talked about the CAT Center making a nice recovery, and then the nail salon issue come up, and it just took the wind out of sales, not even connected to our sectors. For instance, it just took the wind out of it, and it went flat quickly. I suppose that speaks volumes to how aware Kingstonians are, and how respectful we are of the need to do what we need to do to protect each other. So that's encouraging, but it also supports how very fragile the whole environment is right now, so again, the construction industry has been very fortunate to be working. For that, we're very thankful. And I'm not sure, I think Ian maybe not Ian, Sean mentioned about the rates at the accommodation sector and how the rates are getting beat up, and it's a bit of a race to the bottom. And the construction industry is facing that also. There's a reasonable amount of fear about, okay, and are we going to have an early winter? Does that mean we all need to be scrambling for work? And that has caused a race to the bottom. Great for the consumers who are buying the construction product because it gives them spectacular value. But as a person in the construction industry, it's made it very tough to get work because the prices are so tough. But generally, thankful to have the opportunity to work.
Dan, those are great observations, great points for sure. Absolutely. Pavna, how are the nonprofits managing these days?
Well, most of the agencies are considered essential services, so they've been running nonstop. In fact, the demand for sexual assault center counseling or domestic violence is up 30%. Food is up 100% for sure. So certainly we're seeing a great demand. Revenue right now, we've got grants coming. So the government, through the United Way and Community Foundation, we've invested, I think we got 817,000, the Community Foundation got 400,000. The United Way has also put in a lot of money. So just the last quarter, the United Way invested $1.2 million just in 87 programs. And that's just to keep them running and serving their current clients. There's a lot of fear and apprehension about what it'll look like in the next year or so when the money kind of doesn't come this way. Fundraising is a challenge because again, even though they're allowing up to 50, I don't think any of our agencies are geared up in the middle of service delivery to think about fundraising and events at this point. So what we're hoping to do is give some workshops to boards to look at how maybe we can use this as an opportunity to consolidate. If they don't think they're going to survive, what are the back office, middle office, front office? Is it some shared services, some common intake, some common spaces? What can we do to consolidate? So we'll be helping boards with that tough decision. We're also looking at, there's some innovations, some good things have come out of this. For example, the meal providers and food providers, they've been doing an amazing job of coming together every week and sharing, and there's a lot of donations that come in that can be centralized and then distributed. So we're looking at using this as an opportunity, again, leveraging some of the grants that are out there to maybe create something like a food hub, a warehouse with cold storage and refrigeration where we can start to centralize the collection and then the distribution to the various neighborhood meal programs. We still recognize that small agencies need their meal programs. There's pressure on some of the counseling coming back. Some clients are doing fine with virtual counseling, but about 25% is what we've heard are struggling with that. So agencies are trying to think about how they can bring counseling back. There's some pressure from some of the ministries on group counseling, bringing that back. For example, in the justice system, there's some really good programs, but our agencies are just struggling with how to do it safely and in tiny spaces, right? Our counseling offices are not large enough to for that. So they're doing a good job of sharing resources and figuring out how to do, again, consulting with public health, and there's some ministry guidelines that are very helpful. They're looking at that. The piece that we're really going to focus on, in addition to all this settling the agencies and anticipating the demand that's going to continue to grow, is the whole communications and advocacy, helping governments realize that this is not a nice to have. These are essential services. If we didn't have this network of agencies working so hard with all the partners, there were so many people who would have just not survived, literally, with food and shelter and everything else. So certainly helping people understand that these are essential services. These are not just soft services that are charitable in nature. Some of these are really core basic needs for our fellow people. So looking at that. Volunteers is also interesting because volunteers have been dying to come back, but again, our spaces haven't allowed them. So we're starting to think about like the food bank now can allow 50 people in their space or up to 50 people. So how do they do that safely? And again, volunteers, so far we've only been using volunteers for volunteer driving or something open air, not allowing them into the space. So that's another issue that our agencies are looking at and how they can bring them back. Because without volunteers, it's a lot of strain on staff. And the staff are pretty stretched at the best of times, and the growing demand is not helping that. But a lot of innovation, a lot of positive, a lot of confidence.
Great, thanks, Pavna, for that detail and those examples. That's excellent. So I think that actually is a nice segue into the next item on our agenda, which is really is this something that actually Sean asked if we could have a discussion on, which is the space for advocacy around what the evolution of stage 3 might look like. So I think it was clear when the province announced the move to stage 3 that we're going to be in stage 3 for a long time. So that this is what we have to work with for the foreseeable future. I see Hugh nodding, so I just make sure that I'm getting that right until whether we get a vaccine or whatever that looks like. But that there might be some space, for some changes and some evolution to stage 3, but I think that's something that, we can talk about to say is if there are elements or things that could be tweaked. This is something would have to be advocacy because that's the province that would have to make that decision. So that's not something that we would be able to do locally. So Sean, maybe with that introduction, maybe I'll hand it over to you just for your thoughts and take on that.
Well, thank you, and frankly, the entire conversation and your introduction really do sum up well why this is, I think, worthy of our conversation. The Minister of Tourism holds regular calls. Minister McLeod holds regular calls, and one of the things that she was asking our sector associations to begin to do was to begin to advocate for how we could smartly adjust the initial guidelines and to suggest timeframes and to be consistent and constant about that. So Tim's example of looking at a specific space, or Trisha's example of having a theater that could socially distance properly and hold more people are great examples of, I think, what she was advocating for, is to begin to funnel things through her ministry that will help with the overall tourism and hospitality and arts landscape. And those are all wonderfully under her portfolio right now, each of those sectors. So she's been very aggressive at fighting for accommodations like that. And so, her specifically asking, I think, is a really good sign. And so my intention in bringing it up was to collect some of those things and potentially have us endorse, as well as with support of our local CAP and Visit Kingston and others, to be able to make those suggestions in respect and in support or having the support of KFLA as well, to make those suggestions for our specific location. So again, it's been well said in the examples. We're very, very good about how do we begin to push the envelope appropriately. And a perfect example, as I said, was Tim's example of a guy like Peter Karkoulis has lots of space in the Cavalier Room and could socially distance. So how do we help him out of respect for safety make a good recommendation?
That's a great comment, Sean. So. Does anybody else want to jump in on this first? Hugh, yeah, I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
I just want to first thank everyone here for partnering so well with us in mitigating and preventing the spread of COVID. I know it's been hard on everyone with the COVID-19 pandemic and the huge impact on our community, our businesses, on our workers, on our consumers. With the stage 3 starting Friday, we are having some heightened alert over the next few weeks because we do expect outbreaks to happen with every stage. And there will be this cyclical tiny outbreaks, and then we're able to stamp it down and maybe another outbreak happens. And there are certain things that will create more risk for the community, such as if the US-Canadian border opens, that is a huge risk to the community if the United States does not control the COVID pandemic over there. I do want to reassure everyone that we at KFLA Public Health do have the capacity to contain any outbreaks, especially when everyone is working so well together in preventing and mitigating the spread. We have trained many of our staff in case and contact management. I just want to, again, reassure everyone that we do have the contact tracing capabilities, and we do have plans of surge capacity within public health, as well as with partners for outbreak management. And the hospital and healthcare sector are also closely partnered with us for any downstream effects that may happen for the overall community. We do understand there are a lot of questions about how stage 3 is interacting with our mandatory masking order, and we are looking closely at that. And we have been working on that, and hopefully that will be able to be put in place very soon, pending some feedback. And we have heard much feedback from the community, from business owners, from workers, from consumers about certain things within the order. And it is a constant evolution of, we were one of the very first jurisdictions to put it in place. And we have seen now many other jurisdictions within Ontario putting mandatory masking orders in place. And we do learn from each other to adapt it so it's suitable and strikes that fine balance of both protection of the community as well as not too onerous requirements for the overall community. But we also have heard great feedback from our phone lines as well as from folks talking to our staff about how mandatory masking has helped them maintain that sense of security within the community. I do believe that what everyone has mentioned about consumer confidence, that is part of the reason of some increased consumer confidence, as well as confidence in workers and being protected in the workplace. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh. We're going to come back to that consumer confidence piece in just a minute, in just a moment. What I'm wondering, Sean, is if there were specific asks that would be modifications of stage 3, and I think Hugh's made a good point. I don't think that's going to happen right away. I think that, that cautious approach, needs to happen. I understand we're talking about tweaks here. Still the thought and the idea that you're suggesting is still very much to be in line with, keeping people safe. It's just sometimes it's a tweak, it's a change. And so maybe what we could do is we could collect any of those ideas and suggestions and then, connect with public health and make it, basically that would help guide our advocacy. So when I've done advocacy on this, for example, on the ask for a regional approach, for example, it was Dr. Moore and myself kind of making the ask together. So it was effective. It wasn't just seen as something that's going to benefit the economy. It's something that's very much in line with what's best for public health interests as well. So maybe we could take kind of a similar approach there. Maybe I'll just make a note of that. I think we could do a more in-depth discussion around that and just collect and how to inform what our advocacy approach could be going forward. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Brian, I think that's entirely reasonable. And the suggestion wasn't that, without stage 3 even being launched, that we should out of the box be trying to change things. I think it was just the idea that the province is going to be open to municipalities and sector associations through the Minister of Tourism et al. Of beginning to talk about opportunities that would be regional. And I think, to echo what everyone has said, the level of communication that we have in this forum and that the level of communication we've had between all of the supporting groups, ECDEV and tourism and KFLNA and the city and so on has been outstanding, and they're great examples. And I think if we can just make sure that we're constantly talking about that at this level, that will give business owners confidence that we're a good advocate for them. So I think we're not ready to jump on this right away. I agree with you that it should just maybe be a standing agenda item that we bring forward that allows us to speak to our sectors and bring ideas back that may be future adjustments. Thank you.
Absolutely, no, and it's a great suggestion, Sean. And I think that's really one of the mandates of this group, is to be able to identify those opportunities. Advocacy is a big piece for us. And so I think it's good to start doing that thinking now. So I think it's great that we've raised it. Let's start to think it through. We'll discuss it, get it to a point where we're comfortable with it. And then that's a piece that we could even recommend to the province from there. So that's great. Thank you. So Sean, the other piece that you had put on the agenda, but a number of people have spoken to is consumer confidence. And I think what I've heard from the group today is how important that is. But I think that one of the things that we're dancing around is, okay, what are the ways that we can address it, that we can improve it? What are some of those strategies? I think that's another great thing that would come out of this group. So Sean, again, I'm going to turn it over to you and love to hear your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I don't think I have much to add to that, Brian, because this group is so sensitive to the fragility that, Dan used the word fragility. That's exactly the word I was going to use. So one of the things, again, that the minister was seeing, as sort of a pan-provincial look at things, as she was seeing the ebbs and flows of that confidence that we've been talking about. and was going to be encouraging on her visit, specifically encouraging the MPPs and counselors to talk about safety in their wards and to celebrate, you know, the collaboration between the health units. And, you know, something Hugh just said was just fantastic. That reassurance that, you know, KFLNA is ready, is coordinated, that, you know, the response to the outbreak that came is atypical of the way it's being handled, frankly, in other places, and was quickly controlled. And the level of communication should be reinforced as a way to build confidence. And so, and you know, what Susan had said earlier about the way in which people are responding to one another, and the ease at which our citizenry has adopted these changes and the care for one another are all things that can be reinforced to build confidence for folks. As I said earlier, there's not enough quantity of potential guests for the hotels to be successful with a purely local campaign. But what we do is not necessarily about bringing visitors in. It's also about place building here in Kingston. And so our ability, I think, to build the local confidence first is a big part of what this group does. And so I think there's a real opportunity. And I think there's a way for us perhaps to become more public about the coordination that's going on here. So that would be a suggestion. And I'd love to hear from everybody else about how we could help build first local consumer confidence and then translate that into potentially visitor confidence. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Any other comments on consumer confidence? Susan.
Just wanted to share what our approach is, and I think it's all based around, and Sean, you touched on this, is communication and transparency with our customers. And then once they come into our facility, which is the only part that we control, is making sure that we're compliant with all of the regulations that are in place. And I think over time, that is our approach at this point. Maybe some of our stores too are taking the regulations that are in place and tightening them even more so to ensure that their staff are safe, that our consumers are safe. But it's a time sensitive issue that we realize is going to take time. There are people that have their own thoughts on this virus and they're not coming out of their houses and they're not doing things. There are others who are, and we just try to continue to talk to everybody. And you know, that fine line of being oversaturated with messages, that what we're doing and how seriously we're taking this and how much we appreciate them coming back and all of those things. But it's a process that is going to take time. And we share that as a community. I think personally, I'm confused on a lot of regulations. And I think with this group, you would think we would be more aware, but there are so many gray areas that, is it okay to stay in a hotel? Is it okay to come to the mall? Is it okay to, all of those things, a lot of people have varying opinions on. So we just keep trying to reinforce our message of what we're doing to help ensure that when they come here that we have taken precautions. So that's just my thought.
I actually completely agree, Susan. I think you're absolutely right. There's gray areas, and some people feel comfortable, and some people less so. And I'm like, everybody wants to jump in, so I'm recording names, and I think this is a really, really key discussion. So this is great. Tim, I'm going to go to you next, and then Pavna and Tricia and Allison, if I missed you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of echo what Sean had said, and with regards to communication, and especially with how do we get Hugh's comments out there in terms of the fact that we are prepared for outbreaks, and the other side of that as well is that there are going to be more outbreaks. And I think, you know, it was so significant in Kingston, the fact that we've been doing such a great job and we had so few cases, huge impact, even though there was relatively few people affected, and it was contained. So I think, it's going to be, to Susan's point, it's going to take time for our community to get used to the fact that this is where we are and this is the new normal. But how do we communicate that we're prepared? These outbreaks are going to happen, but they can be contained quickly. And I've seen great cooperation and consumer confidence just in our operations, and I think there's a real willingness for the community to cooperate and do what they can to keep our city safe. But this disease is not going away until there's a vaccine. So we've got to find that happy medium of being confident that you can go out and stay safe, but also knowing that there will be more outbreaks, but we're ready for them.
Absolutely. That's great. Pavna, over to you.
I wonder if some of the consumer confidence certainly is about health related, but some of it could also be economic. Like some people are just not ready to use their disposable cash when they don't know what's around the corner. So, it still fits into the consumer confidence, but the reasons for it are twofold, right? It's not just health related.
That's a great point. Absolutely, Pavna. Next is Tricia.
I think our ongoing communication and thankfulness of everybody cooperating with best practices, the consumers and all the businesses is really important, and the track record of how Kingston handles outbreaks. But I also think in terms of content marketing that we're continuing to communicate with our people through content stories of what has been happening, so that it's not a lack of communication with our own constituencies, that we have ongoing communication so that we're actually traveling the road with our constituencies every step of the way. And for the arts, there's so many great examples of Skeleton Park and the TED Center, what they're doing, the Isabel with the national competition and the online series with local artists and what's happening at the Agnes. But we have this ongoing communication with our constituency and talking about what is being accomplished right now and keeping everybody involved in this evolution of what is happening in our own areas and what's happening with Kingston. And I think those individual stories are really, really powerful because there's so much innovation and caring going on that we continue to bring that to the public.
Excellent. Thanks, Tricia. Allison.
Thank you. So I have sort of 2 points. One is I'm wondering on the KFL&A public health side, if there's any opportunity to communicate the number of businesses that are inspected and that actually pass. I would know it would be cumbersome to list every single one or that sort of thing, but I think a little bit of what's happening, especially around the nail salons, is we're frequently hearing about those who have been fined, and they're starting to sort of represent at least that sector of business, whereas I suspect there's probably a lot more that are meeting the guidelines or even doing more. So if there's opportunity, because I do think the community looks to KFL&A public health very much as sort of having an unbiased opinion about what's best for the health of the community. So if there's any opportunity around that. And then I just wanted to speak to what we've been trying to do from the Tourism Kingston perspective around consumer confidence. So a lot of our content marketing, we have a publication or a blog post about what's open, and we're trying to weave in information about the safety protocols that they can expect for each experience that's open. I do think consumer confidence is also partially just knowing what to expect when you go somewhere. Regulations, protocols have been changing so quickly that it can make you very nervous to know if you're going to, do I need to have my mask or don't I have my mask, or what do I need to do personally to ensure the safety of others when I go? So I think that's helpful. We're working on a video right now with stage 3 opening to feature some of the attractions and some of the accommodations to just show what Kingston might look like right now, like what it might look like to go on a boat cruise, what it might look like to stay in a hotel. And so that is ultimately a safety message, but more so the message is that Kingston's ready to host you, and that we can't guarantee your safety, but we're working to ensure your safety and to just really show what these experiences might look like in the coming months. And then we're also working with CAP just to try to get a sense of, generally speaking, what are the health and safety cleaning protocols of the accommodation industry as a whole, so that we can better communicate that on our website, where people are reading about packages, et cetera. So again, they can understand how their safety is being protected in these facilities.
Thanks, Allison.
Hi, thanks, Allison. You kind of echoed kind of what I was going to say. Like, we got inspected, it was fine, and there are lots of other spas and stuff downtown and beauty salons that happen. And I think I just want to echo the sentiment that the messaging from the Kingston Public Health has to be such that it's not always like, to me, it always seems like, here are all the negative things that are happening. At least that's what gets publicized. And so perhaps it doesn't necessarily have to state other businesses, but just, again, reiterate that confidence. And then we've been speaking about till there's a vaccine. Like, I don't know if that messaging is quite the right one, because we don't know. This is a strain. We don't know what it is. We don't know if it's going to be like an influenza that keeps coming back. So again, maybe the messaging should be like, this is kind of something that may be coming and going, and there may be waves of it, but with the proper protocols which people are following, that this will maximize the safety for all, so that when there may be an outbreak, which can happen anywhere, people don't just go into panicking because that messaging isn't there. So I think it's really important for the public health to kind of state like, yes, we don't know what this is, but this may be like a flu that may continue. This is the ways that may happen. That's why we're implementing procedures. That's why people are following it. And go with your safety and how you feel, but you could go out here knowing that this may happen. Because I think it's just the fear of the unknown, and everybody's like waiting for a vaccine and a cure, which may not necessarily happen. And I think just to make sure we reiterate what we can do in the meantime.
No, thanks, Abba. That's really good. Hugh, so one thing maybe just to put on your radar, and maybe we can have a follow-up discussion with Kieran about it, that point about being able to publicize the number of businesses that are inspected and who passes. I think that's an interesting point. Is that something that you think you guys could do?
Yeah, so we already do have our inspection reports public online, and that is something based off of regulations that we have to post up our inspection reports. So people can search up inspection reports of all the restaurants and all the personal service settings that we inspect. That is something that we have been doing, but I can bring it back to the team of potentially getting more of a summary idea of all of these points.
Maybe just something in a more digestible fashion. I know that Dr. Moore is good with whether it's his social media videos or just updates that kind of, can create some media stories around, how many businesses are doing a great job, for sure.
Yes. I can definitely bring that back to the team and see if we can get a more summary, more digestible view of all this information.
Great. So this actually segues well into the next agenda item, which is really pointing to getting ready for our facilitated session in the next couple of weeks. And I can already feel the group is already wanting to go there, and I'm just not a professional facilitator, as you can see, so I'm excited to be able to hand it over to somebody that does know what he's doing with this, because I think there's really good strategic points and discussions that are coming up that are really going to help to govern our work over the next few months, and really, I think it would be great to be able to kind of coalesce and be able to put them down on paper, and then that will help to guide our work. So one of the things that Eric Lockhart has asked in advance of our session in 2 weeks' time is for 3 high-level questions that we would like to have to answer as a group. So I'll give you an example. So when we had a discussion at our last meeting, I think that there were a couple of points that were thrown out about, well, what should our priorities be over the next 6 months? So that would be an example of a high-level question that I could give to Eric as one of the 3 things that we would like. Pavna, I think you also gave a good suggestion about what does success look like, right? So if we want to establish, some goals and priorities. So what I'm asking for is some feedback from the group is if we had, three questions that we wanted to pose as being the guiding force behind our facilitated session. What questions should we be able to answer, or do we want to answer as a group? Sort of spring it on you. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. I know it's a, let's think about it and then we'll love to hear from the group. Tricia.
I think the employment question is a huge question. How do we get the 6,000 jobs back, and build our businesses and capacity so that we can employ people? Because I think the employment issue is very, very important, and that affects consumer spending.
So I'm wondering if that would be. So I'm wondering if that would be like a potential answer to the question. So should we maybe have a question like, we want to decide as a group, what does success look like, or what is the objective we're looking at, and that could be one of the answers to that. Okay.
Right. I guess we're looking employment as an outcome. So maybe we're looking at questions and outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah. So I think that's a good example of that. So it's more just the three questions that Eric is going to take and pose to the group that will help to kind of create that discussion. So what does success look like, or what are our objectives? I think that would certainly relate to that point. Any other thoughts or comments? Sean. Sorry, Sean, I think you're just on mute.
Sorry, it's a kind of quick trigger finger. There's a couple of things that occur to me. I don't know if they sit in that big question side of things, but I think they would be important building blocks for us. I happen to think that there's a number of things that are here to stay. Our attention to safety and hand wash and sanitation and things. I think those are here to stay, and I think in the context of this, it might be important to understand what those things are, and that's probably where Hugh and his team can participate. And what is this going to look like a year and a half from now? What is that new normal as it relates to how we handle health and so on? And I think we would also have to come up with a bit of a crystal ball about how long we see this group functioning and being being effective. And some of that is just a best guess, but how long do we need to continue this? I think we have to have a horizon like that gives us a time frame with which to accomplish some of the things, the outcomes that we, as Trish said, that we might be looking for. And then a question that I quite often ask when I'm working with groups or facilitating is, how do we actually come out of this stronger? And not necessarily returning to the past, but how do we get better as a result of this? So how do we take some of the objectives that the city has set out for the entire community, like sustainability? How do we pandemic-proof tourism in the future? How do we build in some guardrails to help us deal with the next thing that would be so disruptive? So again, I don't know those are necessarily questions in the sense that you were asking for, Brian, but I think those are things that we have to have some conversation about. I think we'd be really foolish in tourism specifically if we don't come out the other side of this with multiple funding ways to fund beyond just the municipal accommodation tax. And if we don't think about that now, we'll fall into a trap, I think. So as an example, that's what I'm referring to. Thank you.
No, that's great, Sean. And to be honest, you can just throw out what it is you think you'd be thinking about, and then I can always circle back and try to capture it in the high-level question as well. So if that's just easy for the group, so I would just love to hear on what we want to get out of this session, and then I can try to do the back work from there. Tim.
Yeah, I think I'm echoing Sean a little bit again here. In terms of the long term, and again, I don't know if this is the highest level question or goal, but I think we're going to have to realize there's going to be some industries whose business model has been turned upside down, and restaurants obviously our models based on lots of people gathering. through the night and hosting large groups, etc. And there's the arts that has that same issue, sports, etc. So there's whole sectors whose model have been turned upside down. And I think in terms of economic recovery, I think we have to face the harsh reality that's going to be for quite some time. So how do we help those industries pivot and remain viable? Because that's a real anxiety point for a lot of people. Is my business actually going to be viable through this? And the harsh reality that maybe it won't be using the current model. So how do we help industries whose model just doesn't work under these restrictions survive and aid them to sort of pivot away from what they're doing, and other opportunities that we can create, in terms of tourism and maybe safer ways to enjoy hospitality or various other industries. But yeah, I think a part of our focus really needs to be on those industries whose, frankly, their business model just doesn't work in the current environment.
Absolutely, Tim. I think Craig put in the chat, a way that we could phrase it is, how do we build economic and community resilience? And so that resilience piece is really how do you help those sectors, Tim, that you're talking about, whose business models have been turned upside down? How do you get them to adjust, and how do you get them to be able to get through this next period and adjust to what those new standards are, for sure.
And I think monetization is the key, because a lot of the arts are going online, but it's the key is how to figure out the monetization model of a new model.
Absolutely. Abba.
I think most of what I was going to say was already kind of echoed, but also maybe looking at what do we need in terms of advocacy for funding, for example, for businesses as a whole to get through a specific timeline. Are there specific points that we need to see from our different sectors where we can maybe try to lobby for funding to help sustain us over the next year or so, based on the conversations that we have over the next few weeks?
Absolutely.
Just follow up to that, Brian. Sorry. Just as follow up to Abba's point, since the social service recovery, we're actually working with Kathleen Bollerbrecht to develop some points for advocacy with our government partners. And I wonder if we can do it jointly rather than in separate pockets.
That's a great suggestion. There's no doubt in my mind that I think that one of the things that should come out of our work is the advocacy piece, and then the strategy that we can build around it. Because I think it's got to be well planned and well coordinated. And I think Papa, your idea about connecting that with the social recovery, I think that's a really good one. Absolutely. Dave, and then Ian. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thank you. From a labor standpoint, I'm just really looking forward to the employee survey that's going to be coming out the next couple of weeks that Craig and Ian have been working very hard on. The survey looks amazing, and I think it'll really show some themes, and the data coming from it will kind of guide us on some priorities for stage 3 and the foreseeable future. So really looking forward to seeing some of the feedback from that survey.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what we're able to get back from that survey. Ian, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, building on Craig's note on community resilience, I think a great outcome from this group would be increasing community empathy. We're very lucky in Kingston that we have so many secure jobs. If you look at the job counts for healthcare and social assistance, for public administration and educational services, they make up a large portion of our workforce in Kingston. And I think that there is still a bit of a divide between the small business owners and the people that have fairly stable jobs. So they haven't truly felt, other than the fear that they've gone through this pandemic, they truly haven't felt what the small business owners that make up our downtowns and East End and West End are. So I think if we can build on that empathy between the groups and sectors in Kingston so that we can come together to build better community resiliency. I think that would be huge as we continue to go through other waves of this, so that people can come together instead of becoming more divided. And we saw teeth come out a couple of times throughout small outbreaks. And I think that that's not Kingston. That's not the way I've known Kingston since I've been here. So I think that that would be a positive outcome from our chats to help build that empathy across the board.
Thanks, Ian. Craig, I'm sorry, I didn't have my participants window up. So I hope you haven't had your hand raised for like the last hour. So sorry about that. Feel free to jump in, Craig.
Only the last half an hour. I just it was you sort of jumped into this discussion just with regard to consumer confidence. There might be a value in Queens. Both those institutes have St. Lawrence College has the Center for Behavioral Sciences, and Queens has significant capacity. School of Business in behavioral economics, seek some driven or some certain expert advice on how to impact consumer and community behavior.
No, that's a great idea. Absolutely.
I'll reach out to them later this week.
Okay. Thanks, Craig. That's great. Is there anybody else that wants to offer any thoughts or ideas just on this setting that's going to help to kind of direct and govern our discussion in 2 weeks' time? Tricia.
I love the idea about reimagining business models. And when you look at Germany, when a lot of jobs were being lost in the manufacturing sector to cheaper labor markets, what the government did was they actually invested in robotization so that they could keep manufacturing and jobs within Germany. So they took that action. So what do we need to do as a city to help with a change in the business models? I think that's just such a brilliant point, and thank you for making that, Tim. That was great.
Excellent. So maybe what I'll do, if it's okay with the group, I've taken notes through this discussion. What I'm going to do is I might get some help, but I'll work with a couple of folks. We'll try to craft high-level questions that basically capture everything that has been discussed. And so what I'll do then is I'll circulate it to the group, make sure everyone's comfortable with it ahead of time. Again, it may not necessarily have exactly what your comment was, but I'm going to try to make sure that what you've brought forward will fit into or under one of those three questions so that we have space for you to bring out and we can talk through those points during our session in 2 weeks' time. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Okay, great. Susan, did you want to jump in there?
I just wanted to make a small point. I think the other thing that we need to consider is what everybody's just been dealing with the immediate, and thinking towards the future is a little bit daunting. But what does our new foundation look like? Are children going back to school in the fall? Are we all going to be going back to work? Are people working from home? What does our new foundation look like? I think that it becomes the basis of how we reestablish a lot of what we're talking about.
I could not agree more. I think that's an excellent point for sure. Okay. Thanks, folks. That's a great discussion. Very, very helpful for me. Just watching our time, I did want to give some space just for a few updates on a couple of things that are being worked on at a staff level and some things that we have talked about around the table. So Craig, I'm going to turn over to you just for an update on the FedDev funding application that we're working on. If you could give an update to the group, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pattison. And just for those who are unfamiliar, FedDev Ontario is the economic development agency for Southern Ontario. So it's a federal agency involved in economic development. So the city and economic development, they can provide support to. And there's certainly significant data work that we've been doing that shows how hard the tourism sector has been hit. Staff consulted with industry partners on the design of some direct business support programs. That application has been submitted and is in process and at final consideration. FedDev is sort of determining what the best avenue for investment is. And we hope to hear in the coming days, and we're ready to deliver almost immediately. So I hate to say stay tuned, but that's sort of where we're at. Happy to sort of answer any questions.
Thanks, Craig. I think we just lost you just in the beginning of your discussion there, but definitely hoping for some good news shortly that we'll be able to share with the group. Any questions for Craig? Okay. Next, I'm going to go over to Allison for an update from the Tourism Working Group. Allison.
Sure. So the Tourism Working Group had their first meeting last Thursday. And this committee is made up of members from Tourism Kingston, from the city, from downtown Kingston, from Frontenac County, the accommodation sector, the culinary sector, and the attraction sector. So there's a really nice sort of spread of people across the industries that affect tourism. So that was great. And really, we sort of dove right into looking at and assessing immediate needs in terms of tourism recovery. So in particular, especially as we enter stage 3 now, looking at the fall and winter for product development. So it's great to have St. Lawrence Parks Commission at the table with us. So there's conversations happening around, some of their programmatic offerings like Fort Fright, or, whether tours might come back at KP, things like that. So we're working out those details. And we're also looking specifically at winter. How can we further animate Springer Market Square, building off the Love Kingston Marketplace, looking at things like Festival of Lights or Festival of Trees, or expanding FedFest programming. And then we're also looking at culinary in particular, because Destination Ontario has indicated that they will be going out with a campaign called the Great Taste of Ontario Road Trip. And DMOs that received funding through the Regional Relief Recovery Fund, which Tourism Kingston and CAP did jointly, have contributed some portion of their funding to that program. And that program will focus on feast-on registered restaurants and also culturally diverse restaurants. They will be waiving the fees for accreditation for feast-on. So our immediate task is really, once we have more information about this program, to get out and work with our restaurant partners to help them get registered and accredited as a feast-on restaurant so that they can be profiled as part of this province-wide campaign. And then we're also looking forward to 2021, sort of recognizing that we will be in stage 3, probably for the foreseeable future. We have a lot of festival events that happen in Kingston that tend to have capacity beyond the 50 persons. So to Tricia's point, how can this group work with those events, or work with them to build new events that will help them survive during the period before we get back to sort of true normalcy and true recovery. We're meeting again in early August, so I'll have more to report after that.
Thanks, Allison. Any questions for Allison? So I know a number of you are involved in those discussions, but that's a great update. Okay, thanks. And now over to you, Lanny. Just an update on the childcare front.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I know childcare has been a topic of conversation, and we heard today some concerns from people returning to work, not having access, or not feeling anyways that there's proper access to childcare. So I had the opportunity to send some information to the group yesterday that is quite detailed, but there is some good news. With the stage 3 reopening, the province has obviously allowed for larger groups, so an increase in cohorts that are allowed within childcare spaces and summer camps as well. So when we looked at the childcare centers that we have currently that could operate to their maximum capacity as permitted by the province, we could see as many as 1,250 spaces in childcare alone over the next couple of weeks. Now, keep in mind, I do want to remind the group that this requires obviously for all centers to agree to operate to maximum allowed capacity. Some of them may not be able to do that because of staffing restrictions, or there may be other reasons why they can't operate at that capacity. But we do know that based on the increased numbers that we could see as many as 1,250. We are currently at 750, so that gives you an idea of the increase that we can see over the next couple of weeks. Same thing with summer camps. The stage 3 changes has increased the number of kids that can actually participate in summer camps. We have currently about 2,200 spaces in summer camps, and that number can go up to 2,900 spaces. So that's a pretty significant increase that we will see over the next couple of weeks. Again, these summer camps are operated by Boys and Girls Club, and we are partnering with them by providing access to a number of city recreation facilities. So in the summertime, we have made the decision to not offer other types of recreation programming within those facilities, so we can really try to maximize the number of summer camp spaces, because we have been hearing from the community how challenging it's been to return to work and have places for their kids to go. So these summer camps are also distributed across the city. So there are some in the different areas in the West End, central part of the city, etc. And we've tried to cover East End as well. So we've tried to cover all different areas of the city. I know there was a question last time about subsidy for childcare. So the subsidy does apply for people that have lower income for childcare services. So it doesn't matter where the child goes. It's the subsidy is based on the child and not the actual childcare center. And we are prioritizing people that have to return to work in terms of childcare spaces. So I wanted to provide an update. I know there are some good news. I know it's probably not exactly the numbers that we're used to seeing in terms of childcare spaces and summer camps, but I think it's moving in the right direction. I do want to point out that we heard just this week from Boys and Girls Club that they do currently have some spaces still available in summer camps. So the 2,200 spaces are not yet completely filled, and we will be building up on that.
That's great. Thanks very much for that update, Lanny. Are there any questions from the group on that? Again, nice to see that things are moving in the right direction on the childcare front. I think again the school situation in the fall we know is going to be a huge unknown and a huge deal. So obviously we'll continue to watch that one as well. But it's nice for the summer that things are moving in the right direction. Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
So you mentioned that the camps that the Boys and Girls Club run will be open. Will the city run camps be open, such as Walls and Waves, Sports of All Sorts, and Grass Creek Park? And has there been any consideration of creating new camps, or it would create jobs in the city for young workers, and also provide increased childcare spots?
So thank you for your question. So the city, so camps are already operating, I should clarify that, summer camps are. And that's why I indicated earlier, Boys and Girls Club has indicated to us that there are still spaces available in those camps currently. The increase in numbers is as a result of stage 3, but right now we have 2,200 spaces for summer camps. The city made a decision with all the things that are going on with COVID and different reopenings and areas of focus. The city made a decision some weeks ago to work with Boys and Girls Club to enable those summer camps in city facilities and not try to compete with this non-for-profit organizations. We're trying to avoid that. We know that the non-for-profit sector has a significant role to play, and that's been part of Boys and Girls Clubs, mandate and delivery of service for a number of years. So rather than trying to compete, we've been trying to work with them. We know that facilities are limited, and that's why we've decided to partner with them. And we will not be offering separate summer camps. We're instead partnering with Boys and Girls.
Thanks, Lanny. Any other questions? All right, folks. It's 10:36. If there's nothing else for the cause today, thank you so much for your time and for the great discussion today. Like I said, I'm going to follow up with those points to help guide our facilitated discussion in 2 weeks' time. So have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Thanks, everybody.